Hello, everybody. Good afternoon. I'm Craig LaBan, the restaurant critic for the Philadelphia Inquirer, and I am smiling beneath this mask. That's because I get to kick off the Inquirer's 3-day virtual food festival to celebrate our new dining guide, Let's Eat Philly. And I have an incredible guest here today in Heather Thomason, the founding butcher of Primal Supply, who is one of the sharpest minds in the local food chain. We'll be talking sustainable meats, about helping her business adapt to survive and thrive during COVID, and also get into lots of cooking advice about how to handle this year's downsized Thanksgiving feast and the other holidays coming up too. Did someone say, hold up? I can't wait to hear the details. But first, before we get started, I'd like to go over a few quick housekeeping items so you know how to participate in today's event. At any time during the discussion, you will have the opportunity to submit your questions for Heather and me. To do so, please type your questions into the comments section at the bottom of the page. Those of you viewing this on social platforms, you may reference the link in the description on where to view this in order to participate. As time allows, we'll try to get to as many questions as we can during the interview. Now, back to our guest. Welcome, Heather. Heather Thomason of Primal Supply, welcome to Let's Eat Live. So many Philadelphia food lovers already know you as one of the leaders in our next generation wave of butchers. Ever since you helped launch the whole animal butchery program inside the restaurant at Kensington Quarters. And then you went on to open your own company, Primal Supply, which has grown to 2 locations in East Passyunk and Brewerytown, which is your HQ. And I understand a 3rd location is coming soon.
Yep.
Going back to your roots in Fishtown, I hear.
Mm-hmm.
Well, we'll talk about that in a little bit. I think, the first question that a lot of people wonder is, how does somebody get into butchery to begin with? I mean, what was your career path, growing up? And, did you always want to be a butcher?
Not at all.
Well, how did this happen?
So I actually grew up mostly focusing in the arts. I was in art classes in school. I was training pretty seriously as a dancer, and that was my trajectory. And that took me to college, where I sort of fell into graphic design. And I actually spent about a decade working as a graphic designer into my early 30s.
Oh, wow.
So when people ask me how I got into butchery, I like to say I took a flying leap off of a career cliff.
Oh, wow.
But it was all right. I landed. I just, food has always been a really important part of my life. I've been cooking since I was a kid, collecting recipes and things like that, and cooking for myself as soon as I did not live at home. And I was just really lucky in my early 20s that my husband and I lived in Brooklyn, and walking through a farmer's market, stumbled into somebody who told us about a CSA. And that started bringing us to the farmer's market every weekend. And then I started to get to know farmers. And so, throughout my 20s, I had this sort of organic introduction to a local food community in Brooklyn that was like a food co-op and a CSA and weekly markets. And that sort of became my way of life, it's sort of seasonality, that local camaraderie around where food is coming from. And I was working as a graphic designer, but that was sort of all of my personal passion. And I got to know farmers in that process. One particular farmer specifically in Brooklyn, he and I became pretty good friends. And I started helping him with design projects. Like we would trade, helping him set customers in exchange for food and things like that. And I started spending time with him, and he was raising pigs, and he was just running into all of these logistical problems. Like he couldn't get slots at the slaughterhouse for the pigs that he was butchering once or twice a year. And all the cuts were frozen, and the people that were processing for him wouldn't give him it's like at the end of the cycle, the same unwanted cuts would be in the freezer, that he just couldn't sell every time. And they didn't do anything differently. And I just started to kind of learn about this broken process as a consumer trying to find access to these things, like the limited availability of meat that wasn't frozen, that was local and sustainably raised, was a challenge as a home cook. And then, you start to meet the people who are growing and raising the things you're buying and finding out that they have equal challenges, getting these animals that they've spent all this time and energy raising to be cut well and available for sale. So I just had this sort of strange moment where, I was starting to kind of consider what I wanted to do next in my life, and did I want to stare at computers and deal with client deadlines and things. And I had, I guess, an epiphany, for lack of a better word, that I had this thought that if I could learn the trade of butchery, maybe I could get involved in this kind of supply chain and food system and kind of help be a part of the solution. So that's kind of how it happened.
Wow.
And one day I said to my husband, who he and I ran a design firm together that we started, I said, I think I want to be a butcher. And I think it's time for me to stop taking so much client work so I can figure out how to do this. And the rest is more or less history. But yeah, that was close to a decade ago.
Wow. I mean, it sounds logical and random all at once.
Well put. Yeah, like a really thought out, but kind of out of the blue random plan. Yes.
Right, because if you think about the whole evolution of butchery in America, we go from these old school little artisan butchers who, bring these old world traditions along with them. And then it sort of morphed into the Industrial Revolution and the supermarket culture and the demise of so many of these local butchers. You're kind of coming at it from a whole other angle, and in some regards reviving this old tradition, but in a very new way, right?
Yeah, I think so. And there was some models at the time that I was having these thoughts. It's funny. I was actually a nanny for a family when I was in college. I spent all this time taking care of these kids. I lived in New York City. And cooking for this family. I just kind of like naturally fell into grocery shopping. And the mom who I worked for and is still a good friend of mine, this was, in early 2000s, started reading books about meat and where it was coming from, and started doing all this research about, hormones and antibiotics and what was safe, and would send me with these lists to, Fairway and Cinderella, and be like, I need you to go to the counter and ask them, if they sell anything that's antibiotic or hormone free. And I'm a college, I was a 21-year-old college student, and this was all just so new and kind of random to me at the time. And that was sort of the beginning of an introduction to that. Mm-hmm. And taking that and then starting to cook for myself and starting to learn about where my food was coming from and sort of what it meant to kind of support seasonal and local food. I didn't become a vegetarian, but I got to that point where I was doing the thing where we mostly ate vegetables, and then we sought out a really nice, well-raised piece of meat from a farmer that we bought once a week and kind of stretched that into meals because there was nothing at the supermarket. But then, some of the very first butcher shops in this kind of like there was a bit of a craft butchery renaissance, and some of them were in my neighborhood in Brooklyn. Like the Meat Hook opened in Williamsburg, and then Fleischer's opened. So I, as a consumer, just sort of saw this thing happen where these businesses that to me and my friends, I'm now in my late 20s, and like all of my spare time is spent cooking and hosting my other friends, and we're all food lovers. And suddenly they're like, did you hear about this butcher shop that's open and you can get things like lamb neck? Like to us and our generation, didn't have a reference.
And things.
Exactly.
Well, Heather, I want to step back for a minute because, you're sort of getting into some of the topics. I'm really interested in talking about sustainability and the ethics of meat and all that. But before we get there, I'm really curious just to break down for viewers who really don't know what at all we're talking about here, because what you do is so different at Primal Supply from what your average grocery store does. Even when we first met you at Kensington Quarters, the notion of a restaurant that was, taking whole animals in the front door and like building a menu around that was radical. It was being done elsewhere in the country. And in Philadelphia, it was a completely new pioneering thing. And I think it had some growing pains, to sort of figure out, how this was going to work, not just in a restaurant, but at a restaurant in Philadelphia. And then you shifted into this business that you've been growing. And I'll talk about the business, but stepping back, define for people what you do and how it's different from the meat they're probably used to buying at your standard supermarket.
Sure. I mean, I think the biggest difference is that for us that we're whole animal butchers. I mean, that really is the foundation of our work, and it's like all the beauty and all the challenges come from that. And the difference being that over time, the sort of commodity meat industry, as it's been industrialized, is sure, everything starts as whole animals, but it's at such a volume that by the time that it reaches your grocery stores and your retailers, everything is, just cuts in a box. You can order 30 skirt steaks if your customers like skirt steaks. And so for us, the way that I was trained as I sort of, pursued this path of learning whole animal retail butchery, and what I brought from where I trained in California to Kensington Quarters, was this idea that we would buy whole animals from farmers, but that means that there's only as many cuts as there are on a carcass to sell. So a whole beef has one hanger steak. It has 4 skirt steaks, 2 inside, 2 outside. It has 2 flank steaks. So, and a beef is a lot of meat. The hanging weight, which is what we call the weight of the carcass itself that we will then cut after harvest, on average is about 700 pounds.
Wow.
And of course so there's some bones and fat and some usable, but not usable in the sense that people aren't walking in saying, hey, I want to cook bones for dinner. So the merchandisable cuts, if you will, might be like 70% of that, but that's still a lot. And so for a whole animal butcher shop, and this indeed radical still is, there's not a lot of people that have been able to pull off this model and do it well. The restaurant in the butcher shop is that I was working with farmers and working with slaughterhouses and bringing these animals in. And then the butcher shop, which I was running, and the kitchen, which Damon Menapace, who's here with us at Primal now, was running. He and I are looking, it's like I would buy, I'm like trying to remember. I want to say we worked through maybe 2 beef a week. So if you have an even somewhat busy butcher shop, in an entire week, 4 flank steaks are sold and they're gone. And trying to share that between the demands of a restaurant menu and customers at the counter. And thankfully, we've always been really good collaborators. So, we were willing to kind of work together and pass stuff back and forth. And I'd give up things that I knew my customers would want because I knew that the restaurant would benefit more from them. But yeah, it did create a lot of challenges for us because there was things that we could just never have enough of. There was things that we always had too much of. And I think the biggest thing for a customer to get used to is this idea that while there's a lot of really beautiful things that happen with visiting a butcher like that, where you can walk up to the counter and I can teach you how to cook it, and you can say, hey, I have this recipe that says ask your butcher to, and sure, we can do that. But the challenge is that you might walk in and say, hey, I really want to make some short ribs tonight. And I'm like, I don't have any short ribs. Can I recommend something else? And I will say that I have felt since the day that I arrived in Philly, and I don't know if it is that we do have a pretty, just sort of like vibrant and collaborative local food community here in this city. It's a thing that I felt from the day I arrived, and it's really helped support the work that I do. Or maybe it is the history of butchery in our city and the fact that previous generation of butchers is more or less gone, but the presence of them is still kind of around, I think, in people's kitchens and memories. And Philly is a city of cooks too. That's the other thing. So I have felt here more than other places that I had worked previously that generally the reception of people when I say, hey, I don't have any short ribs, but would you like me to recommend something else that might work in that recipe? That most of the time people say, yeah, sure. And then it's,
what is the great alternative to short ribs?
Well, it's like, how much did you have your heart set on something with the bone in? Because if not, then I'd probably recommend you to go maybe with like a chuck roast or a brisket, something else that's going to be fatty and braisable. And if like you're really thinking about that bone and that's what you wanted, then maybe we'd talk about beef shanks, like the cross-cut.
Beef shin, do they call it a shin? Is that the same thing?
Yeah. And, cross-cut ossobuco style. So you have that beautiful little round bone.
Heather, I'm really interested in, your background. You started in graphic design and art, and there's, in many ways, as you said, there's beauty to butchery, there's artistry in butchery, and there's craft in butchery. Did you ever find that your art background somehow applies to what you do? You have to be very creative, when you're talking about coming up with solutions to make the most out of, it's like a puzzle, right?
Yeah.
So I'm curious a little bit about where you learned the craft and how you learned the craft of being a butcher, because you must go to school for that kind of thing.
I wish.
If you don't grow up in a family butcher shop.
Yeah, it's true. If you don't kind of come into the industry in some way like that, there isn't an obvious path to go and learn and train. There isn't even culinary schools. I think people who might go and train there, in your coursework over a few years, you might have one class in butchery, and it's the most basic entry to meat processing. And no, there isn't a path for that in our country. We don't really have that. We don't value trade like that anymore.
Where did you learn?
So I attempted to find somebody to learn with in New York, and I couldn't. I was a bright-eyed, designer with no professional food experience. So people were like, we're busy. And I did, and in sort of eventual frustration and sort of looking for a path into this, I had this thought that maybe if I worked with a farmer, I could spend some time learning about my future partners. So I actually ended up starting by spending a year apprenticing at a farm in central Pennsylvania, by coincidence, coming out of Brooklyn, called North Mountain Pastures. They're still great friends, and I sourced for them for a long time. Actually, both of our businesses have grown to the point where we're both too busy to work together. But so I spent a year with them learning to raise animals from birth to slaughter. And we did some on-farm butchery. We processed our own poultry. We made sausages and things to sell at farmers markets. And I would spend time with the butcher that we were taking our beef and pork to. And a couple times I was around for slaughter and kind of hung out and did that. And while I was there, I was finally able to find a shop in California, the local butcher shop in Berkeley, that did have an apprenticeship program. And I reached out to them about joining them. And they were sort of shocked that somebody wanted to travel all the way from New York to San Francisco to learn butchery. But it was like, I was really serious, and I just felt committed, and this was my path. And it was, I really admired Aaron Ricchino, who was the owner of that shop. He had gone from being a chef to a butcher, and had worked with Paul Bertoli at Oliveto, and then at Chez Panisse for several years. So we were really, where he was coming from and sort of food and sustainability that brought him to butchery was something that I really admired. And I learned so much from him. So I trained at this shop in California, and I was really lucky that I had Aaron, who was an incredibly skilled chef and butcher who really was a precise person, taught me a lot of the craft, the sort of finished detail of the craft. And then another older butcher named Bill McCann, who was also there, a kind of lifelong journeyman butcher. He was the one who he had never had an apprentice, truly, and he was coming to the end of his career. And he would drag me in the back and be like, stop being so shy, pick up a knife, let's look at these beef on the rail, it's time for you to cut them down. So yeah,
how heavy these are massive creatures, so that must have been a little intimidating the first time you did it.
It is. Well, Bill actually coincidentally was kind of a smaller man, like a slighter man, and I think he knew how to work, smarter, not harder, how to use gravity instead of muscles and things like that. So he was smart, and he taught me how to work smart. To be totally honest, the thing that was the most intimidating is because I think that the way that I came to butchery, being so invested in the food system and the farming, and really wanting to help make that connection between the field and the plate, right? I had so much respect, still do, but I had so much respect for the animals themselves that I was really timid about. I had so much fear about ruining the meat, just decreasing its value or making it not be, just not doing it justice. So I had a lot to kind of overcome myself to practice and not be afraid to go for it and stick a knife in something that you might destroy, I eventually got over it, but that was not easy for me.
Did you read Bill Buford's book, Heat, where he goes up to Europe and he apprentices, and then he comes back to New York and he's got a little whole pig over his Vespa, when people are looking at it. Did you read that book before you embarked upon this?
Yeah, I read that, as a 20-something graphic designer, and was so inspired by it. But I've also been there. I've done the thing where I, brought a whole pig into our kitchen and made, told my husband, we're going to pull all the shelves out of the refrigerator and clear everything so that we can somehow fit all this meat back in when it's done.
Yeah. What did the neighbors have to say about that? I wonder.
It was in California, and we'll say the coolest thing about California is that the city composts. So you have trash recycling and compost outside. So it was not that weird to put a pig head into a compost bin and have the trash taken away.
Oh my goodness!
But I'll set it done after I make the sole.
So I have a question. So we talk about you've moved around a lot. You've seen a lot of things, and you settled in Philadelphia. And I often think of Philadelphia's great virtues that it's a city of neighborhoods. And its food institutions, I think, are the cornerstones of those neighborhoods. And a butcher shop traditionally, was often, identified with its neighborhood. People who lived there, the Italian market, of course, was our great neighborhood of butchers. And then you also have Reekers up in, Northeast Philly, and so many butchers in Northeast Philly. And I just wonder, as you settled into your projects, which is really interesting, because I want to, if you could just describe for people how your business evolved from basically when you left the restaurant, you started Primal Supply, and it was basically a farm market pop-up, right? To begin with. And you eventually settled on butcher shops in 2 neighborhoods, East Passyunk and Brewerytown. And I wonder about the sense of community that builds up around a local butcher shop and how that sort of fuels what you do. I mean, you're teaching people something new, but at some point you kind of become one.
Yeah, that's a great question. And I think I've come a little bit full circle on it, to be honest. So once upon a time at Kensington Quarters, where I was running that butcher shop, the thing that I didn't know that I had so much to learn about, to be totally honest, because it was being done by other people I was working with, and it was something that I stepped into, was all the sourcing that happens behind the scenes. You think you have to learn how to cut meat, and you have to learn how to retail, a beautiful meat case and sell meat and all that. But the logistics of working with the farmers and slaughterhouses and trucking and moving all that and getting all that in is quite a bit of work that happens behind the scenes. And I was doing that for the shop and the restaurant. And as I was building up, so like I said, I always felt supported from the moment I arrived from the greater Philly food community, but we were starting to build a really nice little following and community of neighbors at the butcher counter. But at the same time, we had these glass walls into the walk-in, and chefs and other people would walk into the counter at Kensington Quarters and point to those walk-ins and say, "How are you doing this? And how can I get some of that meat?" And it was chefs from restaurants, like fine dining restaurants with seasonal focus, that wanted it, or just ambitious home cooks that were traveling all the way to Fishtown, which it's grown a lot in the last 6 years. It was a bit more of a destination at the time, or I guess just a traveling destination. So the thing is that when I left Kensington Quarters and decided to start Primal Supply, my core thought was, I can do this work that I'm doing. I can support these farmers. I can work with the slaughterhouse. I can use that sort of supply chain logistics foundation that I bought and I built, and I could serve the city, not just a restaurant and butcher shop or a neighborhood. And that was sort of the inspiration behind Primal Supply. This is scalable, So I really kind of stepped away from the counter, I think stepped back into the supply chain and think, how can I reach the city? So we started at the farmer's market, but we launched the Butcher's Club, which is our subscription, like a CSA model, subscription meat program. And we actually found businesses all over the city, like a CSA, to host pickups. So right from the beginning, we picked that we had, so you could, you could join the Butcher's Club and you could go to the coffee shop in your neighborhood in South Philly, or the Farm and Fisherman in Cherry Hill in New Jersey, or places like that once a week to pick up this meat. And we also started putting it in restaurants. We started a wholesale program. And I always felt like the coolest thing was how, as we're trying to kind of spread the gospel of sustainable meat and local sourcing and all that chefs are really like, kind of ambassadors and like amplifiers of our mission. One restaurant that can put the farm name or Primal Supply on their menu and talk to people about where that came from. In one night, they can touch so many more people than I could at a counter.
But what happens when you lose all those ambassadors overnight? You suddenly, the pandemic hits, restaurants across the city close March 15th, and you lose what percentage of your business from restaurants? And then tell us what happened next.
Yeah. Well, so Primal had grown, and right before that happened, as you mentioned, I did eventually go back to retail, right? So we started this shop in South Philly, and me thinking still about access for the city, I thought, we'll have a flagship butcher shop and it'll become a destination for everyone in Philly. And that sort of happened, but actually it filled a very specific need for the neighborhood of South Philly. Like, our neighbors became our customers and they kept us so busy. And so COVID hit, and there was this sort of week that rocked all of us, where everything sort of shut down overnight and restaurants closed without warning. And about 50% of our revenue at the time was coming from wholesale business. So it was
50%.
Yeah, it was about half of our business. And it was the wildest thing happened. And it was, we have had kind of this fortunate fallout from this whole crisis, where the day that it's like the restaurants were so overwhelmed. It's not like they called us and said, "Hey, we're not going to place another order." We just didn't hear from them. Everybody was kind of drowning in their own crises.
Yeah.
But at the same time, suddenly, for every one person that walked in the butcher shop, 5 people walked in the butcher shop, and it wasn't just the neighbors anymore. People were coming from all over the place, and the phone was ringing off the hook, and it was like it was Christmas. Everyone was suddenly had so much insecurity and uncertainty about where their food was coming from that we had just almost double the retail demand overnight. And so we did the cool thing is that, had we only ever been a retailer, when that happened and suddenly there was this increased demand because everybody had to eat at home and the restaurants closed, and I'm told that the shelves in the grocery store were empty, we would not have had meat to sell to all these new customers if it wasn't for the fact that all the inventory that was being held for restaurants suddenly could be available for home cooks. So we were sort of forced to pivot overnight and make that available for home cooks. And we took about 4 days, and we had been sort of dabbling in this online system. And I sat down all the managers and said, "We're going to build this out. We're going to launch an online store." It was like Tuesday. And I said, "We'll get it live on Thursday. We'll start taking a couple orders. And after Saturday, we're closing the butcher shop." Because it just didn't feel right at the time. Like, people weren't wearing masks yet, and we hadn't, sort of learned about how the virus was transmitted. And I just didn't feel like I could continue to let people into our shops and shop and keep my staff safe. So all within a week, we lost our wholesale business. We shut down the butcher shop, and we took all of our inventory, and the butchers just started cutting like crazy. And we just started putting everything we could cut, we put it online. People pre-ordered it, and they showed up to pick it up, or they ordered for home delivery. And we took our drivers who used to deliver to the restaurants, and we launched a home delivery program. So we just did kind of a 180 with the business overnight, and very quickly, suddenly 90+% of our revenue was coming in from just retail home cooks around the city.
Right.
So
that's amazing. Speaking of home cooks, I mean, that's where we're headed next with this conversation, because everybody's got to think about the holidays coming up. And, the whole, obviously the pandemic has changed everything about how we eat and buy food. And you, with this sort of transformation, were able to sort of, be on the right wavelength to be able to bring food to people's houses when they needed it, and also sort of re-emphasize the importance of the local food chain, right? Because I'm already even feeling this again right now, when my wife goes to the store and she's like, "Oh my God, they're starting to like run out again of, toilet paper and flour and, the things that if you flash back to sort of March and April, there's this feeling of, hoarding all of a sudden, as we know that it's getting cold and all these shutdowns are happening again. So you're in a really good place, though, having gone through this transformation already, to sort of be this food source for people. And when we have next week, our country's major food holiday is right on the horizon. And, I'm filled with so many mixed emotions, different kind of year. I'm sad. I usually host 15 to 18 people in my house. I'm the one that cooks the turkey. And none of those, it's just going to be our core 4 people at home. But we are still cooking turkey. And because it's just sort of, we're emotionally attached to it. I think it centers us, and it makes us feel, like some things can sort of still be as they were, even though they'll be quite different. So I'm kind of curious to hear what goes into Thanksgiving on your end, and how are your customers, and how are you sort of advising them to sort of handle Thanksgiving this year? I know there's many alternative ways, but let's talk about the traditional way with turkey. And I assume that you're already sold out of birds, because people know you got to order early. But in general, how should people be thinking about Thanksgiving this year, and with regards to turkey?
Yeah, well, so to take a second and talk about what goes into it for us, in our traditional, but kind of untraditional to most people model, where we work with a local farmer to raise turkeys, I have to make decisions about Thanksgiving in June. And that's just, and I had to do that this year. And, there's certain meat holidays throughout the year. And for me, the biggest one that we missed first with the pandemic was Easter. I always spend that with my family, and normally we sell lambs and hams and all these things. And we were so overwhelmed with things that we didn't really see much holiday demand. And I remember feeling sad about missing that tradition with my family. But, by the time that June rolled around, none of us knew where this was heading. And so the way that it works is that my farmer and I start talking in June. I make a lot of notes every year at Thanksgiving so I can remember what happened and the decisions that I think we should make the next year. In June, he and I start talking about how many birds do we think we want to raise? What do people want? And he starts, making calls and putting in his orders at the hatchery. And all of that is done by July. So last year we sold about 300 turkeys, I think, and which was the most we had ever sold. Wow. And so I talked to Henry in June and said, I don't really know what's going to happen this year. I don't know whether we're going to be in or out of this, but I think we should move forward, And I said, I'm willing to take the chance. So he made all the reservations. Those birds show up in the summer. They usually get to the farm in August. We've learned some things over the years. We used to get them in July. Now we get them later, because people want smaller birds, and we're trying to. It's like this 4-month game of trying to figure out how to let a turkey grow from a little chick to a full-size bird and have it
grow slower.
Have it
feed them less.
The perfect size for November 26th. It's pretty impossible. So we committed to all those birds. We put them out in pasture in August. It was pretty clear this year that the holidays would likely not be what they normally would be. But we moved forward anyway, and we typically start taking pre-orders for the turkeys about a month ahead. So mid-October, we'll start taking orders. We want to have them all be sold by mid-November, so I can tell him as he goes into harvest, this is how many birds we need. I mean, we're ultimately buying them all, but this year we had all of our plans laid out, and I just said, like you said, I hope that people want to have the tradition. Because honestly, we do this once a year. It's a pretty important harvest season for my poultry farmer, because we don't really raise a whole lot of poultry over the winter. Everything is pasture raised, and it's really challenging, and there's a lot of loss in the cold weather. Mm-hmm. So this moment now is their kind of final harvest for the season, and a profitable turkey harvest kind of carries them through until we get back to full speed again in the spring. So we were all really hopeful in October and said, I hope folks will just want to kind of carry on the tradition and cook a bird, even if it's not for so many people. And maybe we're going to get really excited about leftovers this year and all the projects. But our turkeys sold out over 300 birds in less than 2 weeks.
Wow. I do think it's people longing for some semblance of familiarity and routine and ritual. Are they buying mostly small birds, right?
Yeah, and that's something that thankfully we've kind of always, we're in a city, so more people than not are apartment or small house dwellers, and they don't have huge gatherings. So there's always been more requests for small birds than large. And so we planned for that this year. And also some things have been on our side, like this weather. We've noticed how we've had this really wet, cold fall. It's been really hard on the birds. They grow slower. They're burning energy, staying warm. There's been some loss. So we don't quite have the numbers of birds that we hope to have in the field. And I've heard that from a lot of other farmers. So we plan to have smaller birds, and then the birds didn't quite grow as fast as we wanted. So like some weird good fortune, once again, we'll have a lot of small turkeys. But yeah, I'm incredibly grateful that folks either just, wanted to have the ritual and tradition, or just understand what it means to support local farmers at this time of year and said, hell, I'm going to buy a turkey anyway. Mm-hmm. So, now, what should we do with them?
even a small turkey is going to be a lot of food for a family of four, and which is my unit. So, what are some of the strategies that you're talking about with your customers about how do you make the most of a turkey if you maybe don't need to have that giant Norman Rockwell rubber turkey you have behind you somewhere? Don't you have a turkey behind you?
Yeah. So the fresh birds.
This is the time to bring out your rubber turkey. Excellent. Beautiful.
Beautiful, right?
Mine's darker because mine comes off the grill, but not my rubber turkey, my regular turkey.
You get that bark, right?
It's so good. It's so good.
Yeah, so I've cooked turkey. I love Thanksgiving. It is my favorite holiday. It is like, it's not about religion. It's just about sharing a meal with people that you love. And the whole day is about cooking and eating. And I couldn't have a more favorite holiday. And I've been hosting Thanksgiving for a pretty long time. And I've cooked turkey a lot of ways personally. And, now all these years, the stories people tell and the things that people ask for, I've really seen it all. But I think, thinking about the idea that, say you have a whole bird and, now you're 4 to 6 people instead of 12 or more, you can breaking the bird into parts is a great idea. Instead of ending up with 15 pounds of roast turkey, I kind of love the idea of maybe roasting the breast, but then cooking the legs, confit or braise or something that's, even just flavor profile. You could do some sort of deep apple cider, onion beer braise or something on your turkey legs, and then go all bright and herby on your breast or something. Nice. And just have some variety. And things that in the past, if I had a big party, I'd be worried that there isn't enough braised turkey thighs to go around for all the guests. But if it's down to a small group of us,
then how long does it take you to braise a turkey breast?
Roast, you mean, or the legs?
Yeah, the leg. I'm sorry, the legs. Excuse me. Correct. Yeah, you're braising the legs.
Yeah, not too long. I haven't done it in a cup. It's been a few years since I've cooked my turkey that way, but I think you're looking at like 2 to 3 hours in the oven. I would say off the top of my head. It's not terrible. So doing half birds, doing partial birds, kind of cooking your birds 2 ways, so that I think you have some variety and like less likelihood of leftover fatigue.
Right. Well, we have an interesting question in the question queue. I hope people start asking. We're ready to answer a lot of questions now, but somebody's asking, what am I supposed to do with all those innards inside the turkey? I know personally, the year I got a turkey and there were no innards by accident inside the turkey, I was freaking out because I need that stuff. We do the turkey liver mousse, and and I use the turkey necks and the heart to make my stock. How do people look at some of the other things that come with the turkey? The whole bird. When we talk about using the whole bird, it's not just the breast, obviously.
So our birds. So we have the necks, the gizzards, the hearts, and the livers all come in the turkeys. I love that you make the turkey liver mousse, or like a turkey chopped liver would be.
It's a chopped liver, and every year it's like it's either cognac or port in there. Lots of cognac and port, and lots of butter and some cream to make it nice and smooth and silky.
Mm-hmm. And that also kind of cuts the liveriness. That's what makes it so good too. That's what
I know, it's delicious.
I didn't know I love liver. It's like, because that's a lot of fat in this.
Yeah. And traditionally, I would need to put that out for my guests when they get there, because I'm so slow. I'm always behind, when I serve. So I need to give people lots of nibbles while I'm frantically busy in the kitchen finishing everything. So saved me a number of times.
I think if people are over intimidated with what to do with those, I mean, you don't have to think that hard. I personally like to put my neck and all those offals and let them just roast underneath my bird with some onions and carrots, and then they become the base for my gravy, and we get this like incredibly rich gravy. I'll roast that, and then I'll kind of start my roux right on top of all those nice roasty organs and bones and things, and build up my gravy. And they're sort of sacrificial, but the flavor that comes out of that is pretty good.
Yeah, turkey necks are incredibly good for stock and soup.
Yeah. I think that's the other thing, like, you don't necessarily have to reinvent the wheel about how you're going to cook your turkey this year, because there is something to be said. You only get to practice it once a year, I've got like 15 turkeys under my belt now, but it's taken me 15 years to do that.
I know. You can't experiment too much. You can really...
No. So, it's like, go with what you know. Like for years, I just roasted my bird whole. I love to do, herbs, like a compound butter with herbs, and stick it up under the skin and roast the bird. And then it became a point where I wanted to kind of start experimenting, and I was cutting up birds for other people. So then I did some years where I, turkey 2 ways. Eventually I've come full circle where I pretty much always spatchcock my bird at this point, because it just comes
spatchcocking. That's the magic word. And this is obviously, people have been talking about spatchcocking for years now. It's sort of just been in the ether of cooking, not just turkeys, but all kinds of birds. And I think a lot of people might not know what it is and what the virtues are. Do you happen to have...
Craig, I'm going to go.
You have the rubber gloves ready to go. Dr. Thomason, we need you in the surgical room here for some spatchcocking.
So I've got this chicken here.
Nice.
I don't know if you know this, but all birds are pretty much built the same. Spatchcocking, also known as butterflying, the less fun to say, but makes a little bit more sense. And I honestly, I don't cook my chickens whole either anymore. I always do this because it cuts your time. When I would roast a whole bird, if I had a 18-pound turkey or something, I'd be getting up in the morning to get it out of the refrigerator, and you put it in at 10, and at 4 in the afternoon, it's still not done.
Yeah, yes, I'm familiar with that.
So fast. Your grilling recipe, which I am going to use this year, is fast.
Well, you have to, like, every turkey is different because every year, like some years it's like, it's fast, and some years it's not, and I have to stick it in the oven for the last hour to get a finishing kick.
Okay. Well, so
make sure not to skimp on the coals.
I saw 50 briquettes to start. I'm ready. But yeah, so spatchcocking is wild. You will be surprised. I've had that turkey cook in 2 hours, sometimes even less. I'm always shocked how quickly it cooks. And it's a little bit easier to carve too, because then you don't have this big thing rolling around. You've got this flat bird that you can cut. So if you start with your bird here, which I have, and secretly we've already spatchcocked this, but I will show you how it works. So on the back side of it, basically all that it means is that you're going to imagine that this hadn't been cut out. Wait, let me see. There you go. Okay, so the backbone of the turkey has been cut out. This is it. And then this can go in your stock. For chickens, you can use kitchen shears. Shout out to my husband who loves that and always asks why I'm using a knife. But you can also use a knife. If you don't ask your butcher to do that, which we will do this for you if you have a turkey order, a cleaver. A cleaver works really well. I recommend a mallet. It is quite wild to just kind of go at a turkey with a cleaver, but if you can set it up and tap it with a mallet.
Oh, great. For cracking a crab.
Yeah, you can kind of stand your, sort of take your, let me see if I can, this thing's so wobbly. I'm sitting in my office with some poultry, so this is a wild time for me. But you can kind of stand it up and try to like set it at the top. But all you need to do is look at when this was in here. This is, everybody knows the little turkey butt. It's the same width the whole way down. So if you can just identify in your bird where that is, you just cut the whole way, and then you can open it up.
Oh, wow.
And what happens is that you end up with your turkey like this, hence the butterfly or the spatchcock. I personally like to tuck the wings. And the reason why this cooks so well, hold on, let me see if I can make this more presentable by laying it on my sheet tray here. The reason why this cooks so well is that now you can see that when this is roasting, your thighs are actually like down on the pan and they're getting the heat. Right. And like the legs, which are usually upright and they need to cook through, they're on the heat source. It's like the whole thing is just kind of even and flat. And instead of having this big round thing, that's it. So it's not as scary as it seems. It is a major hack. I've had friends tell me that they've had like crises on Thanksgiving and suddenly there wasn't enough time and they spatchcocked the turkey and that everything was better and it cooked in 2 hours.
Very nice.
So yeah, but this is it. This is like, isn't this just beautiful too? I mean, to me, this is like
it's gorgeous. But like a turkey, can you use poultry shears on a turkey? Because those are bigger bones.
I have not tried it. You'd have to have some pretty heavy ones. I think you want to ask your butcher or use a cleaver. And the whole room full of butchers is probably like, oh God, did she just say that? We have enough work now for us. But honestly, we're so grateful for everybody that's still buying a turkey from us and our farmer this year that we'll spatchcock it.
Not everybody is going to. This is probably a year when a lot of people are going to think differently about Thanksgiving, but then we also have other holidays coming up.
Yeah.
How should people think about some alternatives to turkey? I mean, we've got all kinds of options, right? And
we do.
You have some unusual things that maybe some butcher shops don't. But like, how should people think about alternatives to turkey this year?
Yeah. So, I mean, first of all, we are sold out of turkeys, but we will be harvesting a ton of beautiful fresh pasture-raised chickens this weekend. So, you could quite simply just downsize and cook a smaller bird. But also, not everybody loves turkey, not everybody loves poultry, and this is the beginning of our, 6-week holiday season that takes us all the way through Hanukkah, Christmas, New Year's. So I have some other suggestions. Hold on, let me grab a plate here. This is all a little juicy. But yeah, beef roasts and pork roasts, the most common thing that everybody asks for is beef tenderloin and the prime rib, the standing rib. it's called prime rib. Our beef is not graded or prime, so we call it a standing rib roast. But when you ask us for a prime rib, we know what you're talking about. But those are big and they're heavy. And there's other ones. Like we could make roasts like this. This is a beautiful little strip loin roast. Beautiful. So it's basically just like a loin of New York strips. And that's a hefty chunk there. Is that a 5-pounder? Yeah, I'm gonna weigh this in at probably 4 pounds or so, something like that. But the nice thing about this is that it's really portionable for us. So, if you're trying to have a small standing rib roast, it doesn't really exist. At a certain point, it's just going to be a thick steak that's going to fall over.
Right.
But if you're looking to kind of scale that down and you're looking for, 3 to 4 pounds, and maybe with a smaller guest list, you'll splurge a little bit more. We could make these beauties any size. We could do this with sirloin, really any boneless cut. So I think that's kind of cool to think about some, just less traditional, smaller boneless beef roasts. We also really like to think about the pork version of this. This right here. Right? How about this? So this is a pork standing rib roast. Basically, you've got your whole thing of pork chops, and it's cool because it's a lot. It's a smaller commitment, price and physically, than a beef roast. To put in your oven. And again, we could kind of make this any size. So you figure it's kind of like a pork chop per person. So we could cut this right here and
can you wrap it into a beautiful little crown?
The crowns are tricky. Craig, I hate crowns. Because in order to make them,
Cleaver queen.
I am, but in order to make them, first of all, traditionally you French the bones, so you're cutting off all this meat. And then, it's like, if you'd really like to pay the same price for me to sell you more bone and less meat, that's on you for presentation. But you have to trim a lot of fat. You have to French the bones to get that thing to bend around. You can't really make them smaller or larger. They're just, you wrestle them forever, and I don't love them. And honestly, this is essentially the same thing, just not formed in the crown.
It's really beautiful.
More portionable. And we can do cool stuff. We can hinge the ribs off. So basically, let's see, I got a little bit of a reflection here. Let's see. That works. So from this point here, we would take our knife and just kind of start to cut those bones off almost all the way so that they'd open like a book, if that makes sense. But then we tie them back on. So you roast your roast. When you're done, you snip the strings. Those bones fall off, and everybody can get a rib. But then you can just have a nice boneless, a boneless roast to slice.
Right. So quick question. So how long does that's a hefty, that's probably 8 to 10 pounds, right?
Yeah. I got 8 bones on this guy. Yeah, probably about 10 pounds.
So how long is that going to take to roast?
The general rule that we usually use as a framework is if you're starting at kind of like your 350 average roast temperature, I'd guess about 15 minutes per pound. So you're definitely a couple hours on that guy.
Right.
But it's still not part of the holidays is that you make your house warm and you have some snacks and some drinks while you wait for
fabulous smells. So what if inevitably somebody's aunt is going to want their pork fully cooked,
yes,
well done. But what is your philosophy now with pork in terms of cooking it on doneness?
That is a great question.
Evolving philosophy on that, right? It depends on the product.
So 2 things. Trichinosis, which is the reason why we were always afraid of eating pork that was undercooked. It's not really a threat now in the way that it was, 50 plus years ago. And also knowing that our pork is coming from these happy, healthy, pasture-raised animals, I have no doubt in the, sort of the health and safety of our pork and the ability to eat it medium rare. I've eaten raw pork many times. Sometimes I taste the sausage raw before we stuff it. I once got served a raw sausage in Italy, and it was fantastic. But I prefer my pork medium. Not quite medium rare, but I don't like it past that. I think that if your pork is the other white meat,
yeah, right.
If you cook pork to white, that means it's dry and it's overcooked.
Yeah.
You want your pork to be a little rosy. So I recommend, when we talk to customers about cooking pork chops or the more traditional, center cut boneless pork loin roast, I recommend cooking it to an internal temperature of about 135 so that it carries over to 140. Mm-hmm. And that should give you a touch pink when you cut into it.
Right. Heather, I have a couple other questions I want to get to. Somebody's asking if capons are still available. And tell us, what is a capon?
A capon is a like castrated larger male chicken.
Oh yeah. Do you sell those at Primal Supply?
It's a thing that people have always asked me about. I've never personally worked with farmers and raised them or eaten them, to be honest. It's something that I only know that answer from Googling it every time somebody asks us. But we can let chickens get big.
Right. Yeah, right. Chickens. The other thing is, so, we're talking about the holiday time because, it's special things coming up. But, people are going to be cooking for months now, going back in their houses, cooking cozy things. And, of course, it's winter. So we're talking about stews and sort of comfort foods. What are some of the alternative sort of underutilized cuts that maybe people can think about to use in these things that are both delicious and also economical, because people are going to be tightening their belts. They already are. These are tough times. These are tough times. So, like,
it's the
how
perfect
can people look at these other things to sort of consider for,
Yeah. I love that. This really is this season is very friendly for kind of thrifty economical cooking, to be totally honest, because I think the cuts that the expression of like eating high on the hog is this idea that all of those cuts that are up, the farthest off the ground, the top of the back, the loin meat, that's the most valuable, right? That's our like loins and tenderloins and steaks and chops. And, we value tenderness and convenience. We want something that you can cook in 15 minutes in a cast iron skillet and it melts in your mouth.
Right.
So, market value and also just sort of the yield off of our animals, to be honest, is that those cuts that are the harder working parts of the animal that, you have to take some time and care to cook them slowly and let them render and melt down. They give you back so much in flavor, and they tend to be the more affordable cuts. So like beef shanks, which I mentioned before, those ossobuco cross-cut beef shanks.
Oh yeah.
Those are amazing. And they're one of our least expensive cuts of beef, even just beef stew meat,
The shanks are a much cheaper alternative to ossobuco, the classic ossobuco.
Yeah, which is traditionally made with veal. Yeah. I like the you can sort of use one of those recipes and just riff on it with beef. Like maybe you'll sub red wine for white, things like that. But even just, we source lamb, grass-fed lamb often, and like lamb necks are awesome. Beef oxtail, kind of the same thing, where you have these bony cuts that are just full of gelatin and flavor. And, you're going to cook those into a stew and it'll stretch. It's like, it's so rich that you're not looking to eat a 6-ounce portion of meat, that stew.
You have all the gravy, all the flavor that's been infused around it.
Yeah.
Do you cook a lot at home? I assume you do.
Yeah. I love cooking. I cook all the time at home. It's fun too. I will say, I will say when I started cooking, but being a butcher, I wasn't like the most competent meat cooker. I was a competent home cook, but I wasn't like a meat person. When I started working in the local butcher shop, my job and the responsibility that I have when people ask me over the counter, how do I cook this? What do I do with it? I take that really seriously. It's, it's like the worst thing I could do to someone is tell them, go home and cook that for 6 to 8 minutes and their steak is overcooked. So in the first couple of years of butchery, I really made a point to take a different cut home almost every day and cook it and ask the butchers questions and try the verbal recipe of 3 to 4 minutes aside, or braise this for 3 hours, that kind of stuff. So it's been really fun, honestly, to learn my way through meat cookery. And then the next level of it is kind of teaching it to other people over the counter and learning back from customers.
Right.
People bring ideas that I never would have thought of, and we coach people through things. So, but yeah, I think looking for any of those roasts and braises, they're not going to cost you as much. Also, I like the fact that you can spend a couple hours cooking, but you cook a couple meals, and you don't even have to eat it the same way. Like I like to make short ribs or chuck roast or something like that. And the first night we might have that as that braisy beef kind of as the main dish, but maybe I'll take those things and I'll kind of fold them into making like a ragu or a pasta sauce or something to kind of stretch it into round.
You do pot pies or shepherd's pies or something like that.
Yeah. But yeah, like, fold them into stews or pasta or fried rice, tacos, things like that. You can so I like the fact that especially on a weekend, if I'm home, if I can cook for anytime somebody's even at the counter and trying to debate, like, how much should I get of a brazen cut like that? I'm like, you're going to spend 3 to 4 hours cooking, right? Like, buy a little extra, make yourself a couple meals. And except if you have an Instant Pot, which I'm actually a huge fan of. I've come full circle to the technology, the speed and technology.
We use an Instant Pot at our house, and it's stock. It makes the stock so fast. The pressure really extracts so much from the bones, that
and it doesn't reduce. That's the other thing, right? Like you end up with as much liquid as you started with, which is cool.
Yeah, very much. Very much.
So speaking of Thanksgiving, I think, if you're not going to kind of reinvent the wheel about how you cook your turkey, I think this is the year to get really excited about how to do leftovers a lot of ways,
Mm-hmm.
So of course, we always like to have T2. Like I look forward to the Friday in my sweatpants when I eat the entire meal again, because I'm not cooking and hosting and I enjoy it a little bit more.
Yes.
And you need to make your sandwiches, but you need to take all your bones and your carcass, and you need to make broth. And I cord up half of that and put it in my freezer for later to use. But then I'll always use some of it and make a soup or a stew. And over the years, I've kind of like had fun riffing on that. Like whether it's like one year I just tried to make a gumbo instead, or, sort of themes on what the flavor profile of your turkey soup will be.
Right. But definitely, by the way, when you grill a turkey,
Mm-hmm.
it puts a fair bit of smoke into the carcass. So that makes a very different kind of stock.
Craig, I have a question for you.
Oh, okay, go ahead.
So we should let people know that we did have a conversation about turkey, and I have not cooked a bird whole in years. And I also, ever since working in California where it's warm and everybody told me they were going to grill their turkeys, I have wanted to do it ever since, but I've never had the courage.
Okay.
So I did read your article, your tried and true grilled turkey recipe. And this year I'm going to do a couple things I've never done before. I'm going to wet brine my bird. I'm going to find a place to hold an entire turkey in wet liquid for 24 hours cold, which is why I'm an advocate of the dry brine normally for refrigeration.
Yeah.
So I'm going to wet brine my bird, and I'm going to not spatchcock it, and I'm going to grill it. All thanks to you.
Oh, God, that's a lot of pressure. Well, I hope it goes well.
You said
I've been making this recipe for 18 years now. And when I started, wet brining was this like novel, new, cool technique. And of course, people have moved on to, one year everybody was like injecting their turkeys, with these horse syringes and deep frying them. And the next time they were like, now it's like dry brining. So all the people who told you that wet brining was so cool are like, no, we don't do wet brining anymore. But you know what? I don't cook, 19-pound turkeys, but once a year, and my crowd loves it. And, to some extent, you go with what works. And, I do think it's really important to, one, buy a fresh turkey.
Mm-hmm.
To make sure that you dry it out of the brine long enough. Like, so you bring it out of the brine and you let it sort of air dry, in the fridge.
Yeah.
Long enough to sort of get it to, so that the skin will like really handle that right.
Do you like to do that the night before or the morning of?
Well, I bring it out the morning of, because I traditionally would get my bird on Wednesday, and you need to kind of get it about 24 hours, a little bit less in the brine. And, I just put so many herbs and garlic and juniper berries and everything inside of my brine. You can totally do whatever you want with your brine. So, I know I'm sort of behind the times at this point, but like, I would not change my turkey at all because it works. I hope it's a wonderful turkey and that you have an amazing holiday, Heather. It is so nice to talk to you today.
Yeah, this is a blast.
I really enjoyed this.
Yeah, I appreciate it so much. I think we could probably talk about cooking for a few more hours.
Oh my God, so long. If I could just get my family to eat something called lamb neck, then I'd totally be in business. It's a very intimidating name.
Just tell them it's lamb stew.
I know, but every time you go to a restaurant, they always put lamb neck on the menu, and then my wife is like, "Well, I'm not having that dish."
That's the golden rule is like the harder it works in life, the better it tastes on a plate. So just think about if you walked on all fours and you spent all day holding your head up with your neck, the neck is like the most flavorful part of every animal. That's why people love the copa steaks, that we cut out of pork, and it's the top of the butt, the shoulder. It's really pork neck, pork collar. It's kind of that cut. Yeah,
that's interesting. I always found it strange that pork butt actually comes from the shoulder.
I know a butt is not a butt in the sense that we think about it. That's a ham.
That's so strange. Who created that word? I wonder.
I have some butcher trivia for you on that one. I was told this by my mentor, Bill. I repeat it, even if it may or may not be true. but in the sort of Upton Sinclair old school meatpacking days, when all of the processors were located near rail yards because that's how everything shipped around the country. The pork butt, if you kind of think about the size of it, was perfectly shaped so it slid into this wooden barrel called a butt. So the Boston butt is referring to just sort of that cut and the way that it was suitable.
It's referring to the barrel.
Yeah.
That's fascinating.
Yeah. So
I had no idea.
It could be fake lore, but I've been telling that story for years.
And I read that book too. It was amazing book.
I recommend it, as I read it in high school or college, and I reread it a few years ago, and it is still oddly relevant, and it is a great read. So, if you want to think about the dark side, read The Jungle.
Right. So important. So important. Anyway. That's how you end up in these places, right? Trying to do things a different way, do them better, and
keep trying.
Yeah.
We do have a lot of support in Philly, and I love it. I mean, really, our food community is amazing. And you were talking about neighborhoods, and it's like I've watched people, kids growing up, over the butcher counter. We've taught people how to cook so truly. Like someone who didn't know how to roast a chicken, and a few years later, they're coming into me telling me they're into sous vide or other things now, and all that. And it's pretty great. I do feel like, despite all the darkness and uncertainty right now, we've got a lot of positivity and support surrounding us, and people who just want to, cook and love cooking and share that joy, even if it is just kind of like talking about it because we're not doing it together anymore.
Yeah. No, it's wonderful. And we have a wonderful food community, and there's been so much support during this difficult time. And it's first of all, it's great to have resources like you and Primal Supply to help us have these conversations. Again, Heather, thanks so much for helping us kick off this virtual food festival. It's been so much fun.
Thanks, Greg.
Good luck, and have a wonderful holiday.
Yeah, you too. Happy Thanksgiving. I'll report back on the grilled turkey.
Cheers.